Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 332. I'm the host, Kyle Anzalone. Today, joined by co-host Connor Freeman. Connor, how you doing today?
Doing great, Kyle. How are you?
Doing very well. Connor, you're here for the Iran report, and I have some news on our vice president's Pacific trip where she was making very aggressive statements both in Japan about Taiwan and then on the Korean Peninsula. So, a lot to talk about on today's show. If people can share the show, it's hosted at the Libertarian Institute, where me and Connor both have quite a few roles other than just being podcast hosts. We write articles, so find stuff by myself and Connor Freeman in the news section, and then Connor is also frequently a columnist at the Libertarian Institute. You can find his articles in the featured articles section, and then you can subscribe to the show, YouTube, Rumble, and Odysee for the video version, anywhere you can listen to podcasts, and support the show by buying your CBD with our sponsor, Paloma Verde. PalomaVerdeCBD.com, promo code PEACE, PEACE. That will save you 20%, and it gets the show a kickback. So it's a great way to get yourself some high quality CBD products at a great price, and at the same time help your favorite show. So Connor, what do you like from Paloma Verde?
I really love the full spectrum oil. It's a wonderful tincture, but that one has a little bit of THC in it, which I had some great luck with, and just incredible pain relief. Really helped me get a good night's sleep. If even if you have even some like stomach problems or whatever, it seems to help with that too. Any kind of inflammation, but they also make it without the THC, and those tinctures are fantastic. I think the tinctures are the best bang for your buck. It's the strongest stuff, lasts a real long time. The soft gels are fantastic. You take them after a meal, they'll hit you in 30 minutes and knock out any kind of pain you're dealing with. Because you're taking it orally, and so it's going to hit every single part of your body that you got any kind of an issue with. Even though the topicals are great, it's just I like the soft gels and the tinctures and stuff like that. Gummies are great for anxiety. Take them on the go. They're delicious, and they'll hit you instantly. And then the treats for your dogs are fantastic too. My dog loves them, and they're great for older dogs who've been a little pain, joint pain, things like that. But also if they're young or just you live in a loud area, then it's going to be perfect. It'll reduce their anxiety and calm them down. And yeah, it's fantastic. Everybody check it out. PalomaVerdeCBD.com. Promo
Promo
code
code
PEACE.
PEACE. All right, let's get into this here. First article today by Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. Kamala Harris says U.S. will operate undaunted and unafraid in the Taiwan Strait. Vice President Kamala Harris addressed U.S. troops in Japan on Wednesday and said the U.S. will continue to operate in the Taiwan Strait undaunted and unafraid. Harris made the comments after attending the funeral for Shinzo Abe, the former Japanese prime minister who was assassinated in July. Her trip came after a time of soaring tensions between the U.S. and China over the issue of Taiwan. We will continue to fly, sail, and operate undaunted and unafraid whenever and wherever international law allows, Harris said, referring to the Taiwan Strait. Harris also said the U.S. will continue to strengthen unofficial ties with Taipei and accused China of trying to challenge the status quo across the Taiwan Strait. We anticipate continued aggressive behavior from Beijing as it attempts to unilaterally undermine the status quo, she said. While the U.S. is trying to put the blame on China for the current tensions, there has been a clear shift in U.S. policy towards Taiwan, most notably the rhetoric from President Biden, who recently said for the fourth time that during his presidency, that the U.S. would defend Taiwan if China invades, breaking from the long-term policy of strategic ambiguity. All right, and then after that, Connor, Harris went over to Korea, and prior to her visiting, there was a couple rounds of militarism from both the U.S. and from the Korean side. So from the Libertarian Institute on September 28th, military tensions heat up in Korea ahead of VP Harris's visit. North Korea has conducted several ballistic missile tests in recent days, carrying out launches after the latest round of war games between the United States and South Korea. Tensions are rising on the peninsula as Vice President Kamala Harris prepares to visit the demilitarized Demilitarized Zone, DMZ, later this week. The USS Ronald Reagan arrived in South Korea for naval drills last Friday, becoming the first aircraft carrier to sail in Korean waters since 2018. The port call was a part of a joint military agreement from Washington and Seoul to increase military ties. Pyongyang has repeatedly condemned the growing security operation between U.S. and South Korea, seeing regular U.S. military exercises as rehearsals for invasion. In anticipation of the joint naval maneuvers, North Korea test-fired a ballistic missile on Sunday and later launched 2 more short-range munitions on Wednesday after the war games concluded. The RK has conducted a record number of weapons tests in 2022 amid a shifting policy from Washington and Seoul. Under President Donald Trump and South Korean President Moon Jae-in, both countries attempted to engage with Supreme Leader Kim Jong-un. Diplomatic efforts by Trump and Moon led to a rare meeting between high-level officials in all 3 nations and ultimately netted a series of de-escalation maneuvers, including a multi-year hiatus of the North Korean missile tests and a brief pause on U.S.-South Korean drills. The Joe Biden administration, in contrast, has largely put North Korea on the back burner, making few attempts at diplomacy while issuing a steady stream of threats and warning. Highlighting the military activity around the Koreas in recent days to come, as Vice President Harris is set to visit Seoul as a part of a multi-nation Pacific tour. In Japan, Harris condemned Sunday's missile tests as threats to regional stability, claiming North Korea's illicit weapons program violates multiple UN Security Council resolutions. All right. And then the September 29th, the next day, I have another article, this one with Will Porter at the Libertarian Institute. BP Harris delivers fiery speech at DMZ. North Korea responds with missile test. U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris traveled to the border of North Korea and slammed the government in Pyongyang after she departed North Korea. The Democratic People's Republic of Republic of Korea carried out its 3rd missile test this week. Military activity around the Korean Peninsula has escalated in recent weeks. In August, Washington and Seoul conducted live-fire war games for the first time in 5 years. This week, the USS Ronald Reagan made the first port call by an American aircraft carrier in South Korea since 2018. Since taking office, President Joe Biden has committed to deploying more weapons to the Asia Pacific. In May, Washington, Seoul, and Tokyo signed a trilateral pact to increase military ties. Pyongyang denounced the trilateral agreement as another effort by the White House to create a new NATO-style alliance. South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol has sought to increase U.S. military presence in his country, even suggesting that Washington should deploy nuclear-capable weapons to South Korea. Yoon made headlines last week when he was caught on a hot mic referring to U.S. representatives as effers. And he actually, said the word. During her visit to South Korea, Vice President Harris traveled to the demilitarized zone where she delivered her remarks. She denounced the government in Pyongyang as a brutal dictatorship and went on to condemn North Korea's nuclear weapons program while demanding full North Korean denuclearization and denuclearization on the Korean Peninsula. However, Harris committed to defending South Korea with a full range of defense capabilities, appearing to affirm that Seoul is under Washington's nuclear umbrella. Which would mean, of course, that South Korea essentially has access to nuclear weapons, but then, of course, we're saying that North Korea can't have any, and we see why, with that, North Korea is saying they're not going to abandon their nuclear weapons. Shortly after Harris departed Korea, Pyongyang conducted its 3rd missile test this week. The 2 missiles were launched from a site north of the capital. Japan's defense ministry said the missiles were likely short range. The trip to the DMZ was Harris's final stop on a multi-country tour of the Pacific. In Japan, The vice president vowed to strengthen relations with Taiwan and pledged the U.S. will continue to sail and fly above the Taiwan Strait. And Connor, one last thing on this story that I think is so important is to kind of contrast. So this time we go to the DMZ, right? The last time a high level U.S. official was there was Donald Trump, and he was historically meeting Kim Jong-un. Now, just a few years later, it's extremely militarized situation. She's there with all military personnel. There's no North Koreans in sight. And in fact, she's photographed with, these binoculars and looks almost like Kim Jong-un. And so we see how the Biden administration's Korea policy has been such a failure and has, basically isolated the two countries. And, this is kind of what the liberals would have warned that Donald Trump was going to do. He was going to be the militarist when, it's the Joe Biden administration that's so hawkish against everyone. So, Connor, one last article here before I hand it over to you to talk about Iran. And we wrote this one last night for the Libertarian Institute. NATO working with weapons industry to ramp up production. The U.S. and its European allies have begun depleting their arms stockpiles by transferring a myriad of weapon systems to Kiev. The civilian head of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, said he is working with the arms industry to increase production. Since Russia invaded Ukraine in February, NATO members have sent tens of billions of arms to Ukraine. On Wednesday, the White House announced a new $1.1 billion arms transfer to Kiev. Washington has led all donors by a significant margin, giving over $65 billion to Ukraine in just over 7 months. And Congress just approved another $16 billion for Ukraine, and I'll break down how all that money works. And because there's a lot of ways things I think could get double counted, but there has been tens of billions that's gone to Ukraine so far. Most of the weapons President Joe Biden has sent to Ukraine have come under the Presidential Drawdown Authority, which allows the president to give away American weapons without congressional approval. The legislature has approved billions for the PDA in the $40 billion Ukraine aid bill that was passed in May. Over the past several months, reports have surfaced that Biden's extensive use of the PDA has depleted American weapons stockpiles. In response, the White House has started working with the weapons industry to increase the production of several weapon systems. A White House official recently told industry leaders that the arms trade with the Russian war would produce a windfall of new clients and revenue. Speaking with the New York Times, Stoltenberg said Brussels is working with Washington in seeking to make more weapons. We are now working with industry to increase production of weapons and ammunition, he said. CNBC reports the U.S. has essentially run out of howitzers to transfer to Ukraine. The current production capacity for 155 millimeter ammunition also falls short of what the White House is seeking to provide Kiev. Suppliers currently produce around 30,000 rounds per year, an amount the Ukrainian army uses in 2 weeks. Ramping up production will take time and money. When visiting a Lockheed Martin plant in May, Biden said, "This fight is not going to be cheap." So, Connor, not looking good if you are at all concerned about the American budget. So let me turn it over to you and fill us in on what's happening with Iran, protest, deal, everything going on, man.
Absolutely. So we'll start with, I have this piece from Al Jazeera called Masha Amini, What We Know After 11 Days of Protests in Iran. And this will give a great overview of what's been going on. And then I want to share an article from The Cradle that ran at antiwar.com earlier this week that shows some of the stories about violence that have occurred, violent acts that the protesters have carried out, or at least provocateurs involved have been carrying out that isn't being as widely discussed in the mainstream media. So we'll start with, this is Masha Amini, who died. Some reports I see say September 16th, some say September 17th. She had been taken into custody of the Iranian morality police over she wasn't following the dress code, the Islamic Republic's dress code relating to her hijab. And so, protests erupted after she died in their custody. And the idea is that so I mean, let me just read from the piece because it's kind of confusing. But they say the 22-year-old was arrested earlier this month in the capital for allegedly not following the country's dress code for women. Authorities said she later had a stroke while she was in custody and died in a hospital 3 days after falling into a coma. Amini's family, however, in interviews with local media, have rejected these claims, saying that she suffered from pre-existing conditions, and they said that she must have been beaten. A state investigation into the cause of her death is expected to turn up results within weeks. In the meantime, protests that began in Amini's hometown of Saqqez in Kurdistan province, that she was of Kurdish descent, have spread into most of Iran's 31 provinces. Dozens of people are believed to have been killed. I think the highest toll I've seen so far is 35, including a handful of members of Iran's security forces. Dozens of people are, have also been injured as well. The authorities have not released official figures yet. Citing security reasons, authorities have imposed severe internet restrictions, banning access to social media and messaging platforms, and becoming more limited from the afternoon. But hundreds of clips of sporadic protests continue to come out daily, in which demonstrators can be heard chanting anti-establishment slogans. In some videos, women are seen burning their hijabs and cutting their hair. The United States, the European Union, and human rights organizations have condemned the use of violence against protesters. The U.S., as I said last week, have imposed sanctions on the morality police for alleged abuses of violence against women and demonstrators. There have also been demonstrations outside Iran in support of the nearly 2-week protests, with a number of international celebrities expressing solidarity. The authorities have denounced the riots during which public property had been burned, and they said anti-revolutionary elements guided by foreign powers are driving these movements. So President Ibrahim Raisi and other officials have met or spoken on the phone with families of police officers and members of the Bazish paramilitary forces, which is like a volunteer ancillary to the IRGC. As my understanding, these officers have also received state-backed funerals. I think he promised one of the victims' families that there would be a decisive response after, I believe this was the man who was stabbed to death. Now we're going to get into this, but the IRGC has also attacked positions in the Kurdish region of northern Iraq 4 times in the past few days, saying that they were targeting terrorist group, bringing guns into the country to take advantage of the protests. And we've seen some controversies we've covered on the show previously here where, there was a major drone attack in Tabriz earlier this year that was most likely carried out by Israel with a quadcopter suicide drone attack. And then the Iranians responded by hitting what they said was a Mossad intelligence site in Erbil with a ballistic missile. And also there were other Iranians who were accused of who were going to carry out a sabotage attack, there were elements of a terrorist group, is the way it was described, who were accused of preparing to carry out some explosions and sabotage attacks inside Iran, who were arrested after coming over the Iraqi-Kurdish border into Iran. And so, there's been more reports, at least from Iran, that this has been a recurring problem. There was also, I believe, we'll get into this into a moment, but there was an attack in Tabriz, or an attempted attack, another attack in Tabriz. So the elite forces said that secessionist elements have been arrested on Iranian soil, and that a bomb plot, that was it, was diffused in Tabriz in northwestern Iran. The force's deputy of operations, the IRGC, said, "We will hit anti-revolutionaries anywhere they are based and become a source of operations against the Islamic Republic and the nation of Iran." The foreign minister, Hussein Amir Abdollahian, has said there's not a big deal going on in Iran. He said to NPR in an interview published earlier this week, he says there's not going to be regime change in Iran. Don't play with the emotions of the Iranian people. Now, so another important point is the Americans relaxed some sanctions with respect to internet licensing restrictions for Iran in order to support these protests. Particularly when it comes to like video conferencing, social media, and cloud computing services. And it's ironic to hear, these people who are crushing Iran with sanctions and, starving people, as we just heard from the UN Special Rapporteur on the reports about how food insecurity is reaching 60% in some regions. And of course, inflation is near 50%. Same with the number of Iranians living at or below the poverty line is roughly 50%. But we have Joe Biden telling the UN General Assembly that today we stand with the brave citizens and the brave women of Iran who right now are demonstrating to secure their basic rights. And again, speaking about isolation and maximum pressure, Blinken said in a statement, in the face of referring to these relaxed sanctions, of course, only to boost the unrest. In the face of these steps, we are going to help make sure the Iranian people are not kept isolated and in the dark. This is a concrete step to provide meaningful support to Iranians demanded their basic rights be respected. And so we also have people like Brett Stevens and other hawks saying it's good that the Biden administration, which has done so well in standing up to Putin, are throwing their weight behind Iran's protests. It can do even better by withdrawing from the nuclear talks on the principle that a regime that will not give relief to women deserves no relief from sanctions. Okay, so the other point to make is, again, these figureheads in America, particularly these Iranian exiles who are getting tons of press in the mainstream media, they are explicitly calling for Europeans and the Americans to cut off Iran, specifically the JCPOA talks, and they're saying that we don't want sanctions lifted. We want you to walk away from the negotiating table. And I'm thinking in particularly of Mashish Alinejad, who is this Iranian exile who's, she's committed to bringing down the Iranian regime. There's a glowing piece about her in the New Yorker recently, and then it ends with a quote about her going, the Iranian regime will be brought down by women and all this stuff. But she's been working with the FBI for a couple of years now. I don't know that she's paid for that, but she's kept under constant protection from the FBI. There's a weird line in, because she's claimed that the IRGC or the Iranians have tried to have her assassinated without evidence, and the FBI, like with Mike Pompeo, they'll just say that that's the case, and we're supposed to just take it at face value, And there's a weird line in this New Yorker piece where it says that they get really worried if she comes into contact with any Iranians, just in America. Like if she gets near an Iranian, it's a cause for concern. And so she is being propped up as the voice of dissent, and she's taking credit for all of this. Like she's the mastermind of the whole protest. But it's very interesting to watch this clip, and we'll probably play it next week, but it's making the rounds where she's saying basically that, no nuclear deal, no sanctions relief. How can you possibly negotiate with our murderers? And why we want the American feminist movement to join in on these anti-Iran protests and all of this. It's and of course, the nuclear deal has absolutely nothing to do with Iranian domestic policy. And this is just, again, a cheap way of scuttling the talks or making sure that they're permanently dead. So now it's important also to know, because this isn't getting enough attention. This was from the Cradle earlier, I think on September 23rd. So this is 1 week after the death of Masha Amini. This is reporting on what's been going on in several cities with the protests against the moral security police, who I'm not defending, of course. I'm just saying that we're not hearing enough about some of the violence been carried out. So the protests, which started with women burning their headscarves and cutting off their hair, quickly turned into violent anti-religious riots with an emphasis on the compulsory hijab mandate. Despite mobile data restrictions on foreign domains and platforms, dozens of videos shared on social media showed rioters violently attacking police officers by stoning and beating them, overturning and torching police vehicles, and destroying public property. On at least one occasion, rioters were seen burning a police officer alive. That video is on Twitter, and you can find it with the link in the article. The name of the piece is "As Iran Protests Turn Violent, Hundreds of Thousands Turn Out for Counter Rallies." Local Iranian media reports that dozens of ambulances were damaged by the rioters. Protesters also were also recorded forcibly removing the hijab of a woman on the street and following her around to remove her clothing. That video is also in the article. Sky News reported that a local commander of Bazij, the volunteer branch of the IRGC, was stabbed to death by rioters in Mashhad on September 21st. Another member of the Basij, identified as Abdul Hossein Mojdami, was also shot dead by protesters, according to the police. The rioters also set fire to the entrance of the office of Qassem's Friday prayer imam, torching it along with photos of the founder of the Republic, Ayatollah Khomeini, and martyrs of the Iran-Iraq War. In response to the deteriorating situation, hundreds of thousands of Iranians, both women and men, gathered after Friday mass prayers, taking to the streets to condemn the riots and voice support for the government and the police. They also note here that Iranian sentiments critical of the riots mirror views expressed in a U.S. poll taken after the 2018 protests, which revealed that 84.5% of Iranians strongly agree that, quote, the government should be more forceful to stop rioters who use violence or damage property. Only 16.4% of Iranians agree with the statement that, quote, Iran's political system needs to undergo fundamental change. I'll just leave with a quote from the brother of Amini, who says that after visiting the police station, she died 3 days after visiting the police station to, quote, undergo a briefing class about the hijab and was supposed to be released within an hour. And there's a video making the rounds, and I'm not sure if I can confirm it yet, but of her sort of in what appears to be like a waiting room at the station and just sort of collapsing into a chair or something. And I don't, it's hard to confirm any of that stuff. So I'm not going to say that I know if that's real or not. But so we're going to start with some more IAEA news here now. So this is from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. Iran and IAEA still at odds over the uranium traces inquiry. The International Atomic Energy Agency remains at odds with Tehran regarding this investigation, of course, as we all know, into these uranium traces that were discovered at these so-called undeclared nuclear sites years ago. And this might give us a window into why things aren't, going because we've discussed before that the Iranians provided full documentation on all of this. And, of course, the IAEA refuses to accept it, and it's egged on by Washington, of course, and the Israelis and the Europeans, gladly follow behind like vassals, even though they desperately need another crude supplier. In fact, that was the reason the EU pushed so hard to get these talks restarted, and they nearly sealed the deal, but the Israelis demanded that not happen, and so everybody seems to be going along. But not that the Americans wanted the deal either. But the inquiry has been going on for years, and though there's no proliferation risk, the IAEA refuses to accept Tehran's explanations. IAEA Chief Rafael Grossi said Monday that the investigation is not going to go away. So Mohammad Islami, the director of the Atomic Energy Association of Iran, said that the IAEA inquiry, first of all, he dismisses Grossi's concerns, and he says that the inquiry is based on false information. Quote, the agency must refrain from relying on false, baseless information, he said. Islami also suggested, as the Iranians have previously, that the IAEA's investigation is based on evidence planted by Israel. Quote, there are no undeclared nuclear activities or material in Iran. All accusations are merely based on fake and incorrect information provided by the usurping regime of Israel. And on Sunday, Hossein Amir Abdollahian, the foreign minister of Iran, said that Tehran is willing to work with the IAEA, but they admonished the nuclear watchdog to behave technically, not politically. Quote, the agency has questions about 3 alleged sites that they say they have found uranium, and we are ready to provide answers to those questions, Amir Abdollahian said. Iranian officials, including President Ibrahim Raisi, have said that the IAEA must drop the inquiry before the nuclear deal, known as the JCPOA, can be revived. But an agreement seems unlikely as the U.S. has accused Tehran of not taking the negotiations seriously and continues to pile sanctions on Iran. Negotiations between the U.S. and Iran have stalled. President Raisi said last week that Tehran was willing to continue the negotiations, but he questions Washington's commitment to the process. All right, so talks have restarted. This is from Jason Ditz on the 27th, a day later. Iran IAEA restart talks. Neither side has changed positions. So talks between Iran and the UN nuclear watchdog have stalemated seemingly for good. But IAEA Chief Rafael Grossi announced Monday that talks were restarting. He added that he is seeking clarification on safeguard issues. As Ditz writes, this marks the restart of safeguard talks, which have gone unfulfilled for years, leading only to more and more questions. Though not strictly linked to the JCPOA talks, it's difficult to envision progress on those without the IAEA being satisfied. And that's a big problem going forward, as the U.S. and others who don't want the JCPOA settled just yet are pressuring the IAEA to remain unsatisfied on the matter. The IAEA resumption of talks is noteworthy because Iran has indicated they consider the safeguards issues answered long ago, and neither side has any change in stance. This means the next round of talks is just that, another round with both sides heading in with both sides heading in without a deal in reach and just waiting to spin the latest failure as the other side's fault. There is no word of JCPOA talks in Vienna resuming, with the U.S. and others busy berating Iran for its handling of protests lately and not looking to engage or even appear to engage. Okay, so now we get into the cross-border attacks in Iraq. So Iran attacks Kurds along Iraq border, 13 killed. This is Jason Ditz at antiwar.com on the 28th. Still reeling from public protests and the international rebuke for their handling of them, Iran is going down the path so many others have tried, seeking a military solution. To that end, Iran launched drone and artillery attacks at Kurdish groups in the area along the Iraqi border, killing 13. The attacks centered on COI, east of the Iraqi Kurdish city of Erbil. While the Kurds are seemingly unrelated to this issue, Iranian officials have claimed that they are fueling the latest unrest, suggesting they're smuggling weapons to the protesters. Iran also sent a drone in the direction of Erbil, and with Iraq requesting U.S. action, they shot down the UAV. CENTCOM said Iran's indiscriminate attacks were a threat to stability. CENTCOM said U.S. forces suffered no damage in the matter, nor any casualties. Analysts say they believe Iran wanted to externalize the ongoing unrest. The evidence is lacking, but Iran has been at odds with the Kurdish rebels for a while, and making them a scapegoat is a time-honored tradition across the region. So, speaking of this this stuff that we had covered back in March and April about the accusations of Israeli involvement there, and that being the reason for the ballistic missile strike. There's a report from the Cradle that delves into the possibility of this. And from that report, they say, following its attack on Saturday, the IRGC released a statement saying its operations aim to provide security, punish the perpetrators, and push the Kurdistan region's authorities to assume responsibilities for their legal duties. Tehran has accused Iranian Kurdish armed groups of being implicated in the ongoing unrest in the country, particularly in the northwest, where most of Iran's Kurdish population lives. The unrest was sparked by the death of course, the Kurdish woman Masha Amini, who passed away 3 days after being taken in by the morality police, falling into this coma, allegedly. So Iraqi Kurdish media said that Monday's IRGC attack took place in the Sadaqan area of Erbil, which lies close to the Iranian border. Back in March, they're referencing here the ballistic missile strikes. They were said to be on a secret Mossad base in Erbil. The base was allegedly being used as a training center by the Israeli intelligence agency. During an exclusive interview with the Cradle, the official spokesman of the Erbil office of the Patriotic Union of Kurdistan, Azad Jola, confirmed that Mossad has long been active in the capital of Kurdistan. And there is, among others, an Israeli Mossad presence, and this presence provokes Iran into attacking their sites. It's attacking their sites in the Kurdistan region. Iran has done this before and will probably do it again, Jola told the Cradle on March 17th. Kurdish groups have decades of established ties with Israel dating back to the 50s. These have included covert military training. However, the existence of Mossad spy bases operating in the Islamic the Iraqi Kurdistan region have been disputed by Kurdish authorities, and the spokesperson for the autonomous region's government last year, not for the first time, denied the baseless accusations. So we covered that back then as well. So, all right. So now the State Department is saying that a U.S. citizen was killed in these attacks over the past few days in Iraqi Kurdistan. And this is again from Jason Ditz at antiwar.com. U.S. citizen killed in rocket strike in Iraqi Kurdistan. So the State Department reported that the Wednesday attack on Iraqi Kurdistan killed an American citizen, though they're declining to offer details. Beyond that, no troops or officials were killed. The unnamed citizen was one of 13 people killed in Iraqi attacks along in well, one of 13 people killed in these attacks along the Iran-Iraq border. 58 people were reported wounded. Iran accused the targets of fueling unrest with Iran. The U.S. shot down an Iranian drone near Erbil at the request of the Iraqi government. The U.S. accused Iran of threatening stability with the attack, while analysts mostly believe they're just trying to shift the focus of the protest toward these external matters. And the U.S. consulate issued a statement warning Americans not to travel to Iraq for the time being. Okay, so now we have new sanctions announced on Iran now as well, and this is from Dave DeCamp. I believe this is out today on antiwar.com. So, U.S. targets Iran's oil exports with new sanctions as nuclear deal talks stall. So on Thursday, in yet another sign that a restoration of the JCPOA is unlikely, Washington announced yet more sanctions targeting the Iranian oil exports. So again, this is following these pattern we've seen. I mean, recently, some of the sanctions have been a little bit different. It's been a lot of stuff about cyber crime or going after the morality police or accusing them of being behind like a cyber attack in Albania, as we've covered before. Looking for all these different possible ways to sanction Iran. Because, there was a report, I believe in 2021, where there was an official who was saying to the Wall Street Journal that other than, sanctioning their oil sales to East Asia, at this point, with the way the maximum pressure campaign is, there's really nothing else to sanction Iran for. So what they're doing now is they're going after these Chinese-based firms accused of trading Iranian oil, while the Treasury Department designated several entities based in Hong Kong. The State Department sanctions are on the two Chinese-based firms accused of dealing in Iranian oil, and the Treasury designated entities based in Hong Kong, Iran, India, and the UAE. The Treasury Department claims the targeted entities were, quote, involved in the sale of hundreds of millions of dollars worth of Iranian petrochemicals and petroleum products to end users in South and East Asia. Now, Iran, again, has found some relief from these U.S. sanctions by stepping up their oil sales to East Asia. And, of course, that's the main target of Washington. They also love, as we keep saying, just like here, they go after the companies in the UAE that may be trading with Iran, because the UAE and Iran have been increasing ties, as we've discussed before, recently putting their ambassador back in Tehran. And of course, there was a meeting toward the end of 2021 with their national security advisor, the brother of Mohammed bin Zayed, who went to Tehran and met with top officials there. And they discussed all kinds of different ways they could cooperate economically and otherwise. And that really spooked the Israelis and the Americans. So they've been tightening sanctions ever since. And so the mounting sanctions, of course, imposed by the Biden regime has escalated the maximum pressure campaign. And the talks have been stalled. Of course, Raisi said that they're still open to negotiations, but they need a guarantee that the U.S. won't pull out of the deal again. And it still remains unclear exactly what the Iranians have in mind, because as far as I'm aware, it appears that their offers for the grace periods and some of the other stipulations that they had put in their responses to Joseph Borrell, the EU foreign policy chief's offer to, what he called his final proposal. They basically were looking for a window for international firms to not be hit with sanctions in the inevitable situation the Iranians will find themselves in when either Biden or the next, Republican in office, could be a Democrat too, but we're most likely going to see a Republican come after Biden, just decide to rip up the deal. And of course, because it's not a treaty, they can't make this kind of a guarantee, so it's out of the hands of the administration. But there were things that they could do to at least mollify the Iranians, in the sense of, well, they could have that insurance policy we've discussed before, where they have the advanced centrifuges left in such a state that they can, come back online within a year, giving them the ability to non-violently pressure the Americans back to the table, as arguably they have here over this, period between Trump and Biden. They could, of course, we just said this grace periods situation. But all of that seems to have been turned down by the Americans at the behest of the Israelis. So, of course, it looks like there will be, of course, no deal. But at this point, I don't know. We're seeing more and more escalations. Of course, with Iran now launching these repeated attacks in Iraq, and there's going to be massive support. I'm sure, well, we don't know yet exactly what's going on in terms of any kind of covert support that's being given to these Iranian protests, but that could happen soon as well. We'll have to see. Certainly, the Hawks are seizing on this opportunity to just completely stop the JCPOA talks, probably for good. Not even like the Israelis have said, they're not going to happen before the midterms, but we'll have to see what happens then. I think that there's a real strong support among the Hawks and the establishment to demonize Iran even more so now. So we'll have to see what comes next, but it's not going to be good.
All right, Connor, thank you for that update and for appearing on the show again this week. We will be back with more content later in the week. A lot of great stuff coming up this week. Bonus show with Alan Mosley. I got Scott Horn and Dave DeCam coming up on the show to chat with me. So a lot of cool stuff happening. Just be sure you subscribe somewhere so you don't miss the content. Libertarian Institute, YouTube, Rumble, Odysee for the video version, up anywhere you can listen to podcasts. Connor is at Freeman's Mind 96 on Twitter. I'm at Kyle Anzalone _. Thanks, everyone.